Good morning. How's everyone doing? My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you. We're going to do a class on technical analysis, focusing on some studies that are part of the TradeStation platform, and also a modified and custom indicator that I'm sure everyone here will find interesting. Today's topic is decoding market dynamics through advanced volume studies. So yes, we're going to take a look at some of the studies that are part of the TradeStation platform so that we are aware of how you can customize those and make them present volume in a way that is useful to you. And we're also going to look at a custom indicator that was designed by one of my colleagues many years ago. And it's an interesting way of looking at intraday volume and be able to compare, volume at certain points in time. So before we jump into today's topic, let's go through some of the disclosures. Keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only, that these are not recommendations of TradeStation. Also, active trading is not suitable for everyone. It should only be done with risk capital, and past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. As I said before, we are going to take a look at volume studies. So if you need a little bit more detail on the disclosures, just go to www.tradestation.com/important-information. All right. Thank you for taking time to be here in this session. And if you have any questions, the chat is open, so feel free to submit any comments or questions. I'll be standing by to address those and make sure that everybody leaves here with some useful information. I had shared a link and studies in the chat. Let me go ahead and send it again in case you didn't see it. In the chat, you're going to find a link that will allow you to download workspaces and the custom studies that we're going to highlight today. The very beginning of the presentation is just going to look at some of the studies that are part of the TradeStation platform. So everyone here already has these studies. There's no installation or download required. But then I'm going to jump over to this custom study, and you're going to need to install it. At the middle of the presentation, I'll show you how you can import this into your TradeStation platform. It's not very difficult, but it does allow you to bring all these interesting ways of presenting basic ideas, because volume is just a basic idea. It's just the way that you present it that makes it interesting. So this custom study does present volume in a different way, and I want everybody to take advantage of it as well. Let me go ahead and switch over to my TradeStation platform and start analyzing some of the built-in studies. I'm going to open up a new workspace or create a new workspace by going here to File, Workspaces, New Workspace. And I'm going to open up a chart. The chart symbol doesn't matter. The time frame right here is a 5-minute chart. So we're going to take a look at some of the intra-day volume analysis that you can do right out of the box. First of all, this is Spider, very highly active ETF, currently trading at $572, as you can see right here on the far right of my screen. In the studies dialog, let me go here to studies and add a study. There's one study that you probably have on your charts called volume. Volume doesn't come on automatically, but you have a regular volume right here. In addition to all different variations of volume, we're going to focus on just two of the ones that are here. I do another session that is based on all the volume studies that are part of the TradeStation platform, but today we're just going to focus on this idea that it's pretty much how do we analyze intra-day volume. But if I add this volume study, it's very similar to any other volume study you see out there. Volume for securities like Spider has this bowl pattern where volume activity winds down in the middle of the day. You have tons of trading activity at the beginning of the day, then you have a ton of trading activity towards the end of the day, but then in the middle of the day, there's reduced activity. So you get this bowl pattern every single day of the week. Of course, there are exceptions. There are going to be spikes in the middle of the day that break this bowl pattern. It all depends, what's happening in the markets, what news events are out there, and what the sentiment is for any particular security. But for the most part, volume looks very similar on all different platforms. Now, there are variations of this study that you see at the bottom. Let me go ahead and remove this study and add one of those variations, because one of the things that TradeStation clients ask us to do is color code volume, and in a way that they can identify up volume and down volume. If you go to the studies list by clicking on add study, there's one called volume average, which I prefer over volume because it does provide you additional information on what type of volume it is in terms of, is it up volume or down volume? It also gives you an average, which is real interesting. Let me click OK. Now, this is what the indicator looks like. It's the same as the one we were looking at before. It's just color-coded differently, and it has a yellow line going across the histogram. The yellow line, of course, is the average. And if you look over here on the far right, you can see the number. The average right now, it's 506,000 shares traded every 5 minutes. Yeah, because it's all related to the time frame you have on the chart. If I'm looking at a 5-minute chart, this is the average for every 5 minutes. Now, not for every 5 minutes since the ETF started trading, there is a look back period, and the default number or the default look back on this particular study is 50 bars. So it looks back 50 of these 5-minute bars, and it calculates the average for that. So the 506,000 shares is taken into account 50 bars, which of course starts you thinking about what does that entail, because right now it's 11 a.m. 11:07 a.m. Eastern time. So that's this is New York time. So it's been maybe an hour and a half since the market opened, right? There's not 50 bars since the beginning of the day. If you count the bars, I mean, I think there's barely 30 here, but there's not going to be 50 bars. So it has to include volume bars from the prior day. So when it comes to an average, you just have to be aware of what that average entails, because a lot of times it's going to include periods of time where volume is either very high or volume is very low. If you calculate volume towards the end of the day, towards the afternoon, it's going to include the majority of those volume bars in the middle of the day that don't really spike up that much. So the average is subjective in terms of, how do we use it? How do we use this average in comparison to other days? For example, right now, yeah, the average is 507,000 shares, but what does that mean in terms of what happened yesterday or the day before yesterday? How does the volume compare at those specific times? You see, right now it's 11:08 a.m. How does the volume compare right now to what it was at 11:08 yesterday? Is it higher or is it lower? This indicator doesn't tell you that because of the way that it's calculated, but it would be interesting to find an indicator that does. Later in this class, I'm going to show you that indicator. It does some interesting calculations, and I'll explain the details of that study. But let's talk a little bit more about this, because there are different settings here in TradeStation that allow you to control the way that volume is displayed. By default, when you first install or when you first add a study on a chart analysis, it's going to give you a number of shares. And that's why when we saw the value here on the right-hand side, I referred to it as shares, because that's what it is. It's the default. So when you first install it, that's what you're going to be seeing. But there is a way for you to switch that volume, and instead of looking at shares traded, it's going to show you the number of ticks or transactions that have occurred, which is two different ways of looking at volume. Let me show you how you can switch that, because it's not done on the study side. It's actually done on the symbol side. The symbol controls the way that the volume is being calculated, specifically in an intra-day chart, which is what I have right now. I have a 5-minute chart. Now let me go ahead and customize or edit the symbol, and you can do that by double-clicking on the candles. Of course, you can go here to data and go to edit symbol if you want to. That's the way that you go to the same dialog using the buttons on the top. but I like the shortcut of double clicking. So I'm just going to double click on one of the candles, and it takes me directly to the customize symbol dialog. It's just a shortcut. Many times, and this is something you have to be aware of, if you miss the candle, let's say, for example, that I think that I'm double clicking on a candle, but I don't. I double click on the background. It'll take you to a totally different dialog. So just keep that in the back of your mind, because a lot of times you're gonna remember that I'm double clicking, but you don't quite double click on the candle. You double clicked on the background, and it took you to a different dialog. So instead of customize window, I just have to make sure that I'm landing on customize symbols. Let me double click on one of the candles. Here you go. Now it says customize symbol. And the setting that I'm talking about is right here. It says for volume is right under the interval. And you can see that there's two options. I have trade volume and I have tick count. Trade volume is the one that we were looking at just now. Is the one that gives you number of shares. If I were to change this to tick count, it would actually convert my volume study. And instead of looking at the number of shares traded, it's going to look at the number of transactions or the number of trades. Let me go ahead and click OK to this and take a look at the number. Volume kind of looks very similar from a visual standpoint. You know, the spikes, very similar. The yellow line, very little changed. But if you look at the value on the far right now, instead of the 500,000 that we saw before, now we see a 2,600, 2,663 to be more exact. The switch just happened because now instead of seeing the number of shares, I'm seeing the number of transactions that have occurred in the last 55-minute bars. So in this case, Spider trades an average of, or has traded an average of 2,666 times every 5 minutes if you count the last 55-minute bars. Pretty cool, huh? If you look at the current number here in red, which right now it says 680, 685, it just keeps on increasing. That is a real-time accumulation of ticks. That is the number of transactions that have occurred on the current bar. Now the current, but what time is it right now? It's 11:12. You can see the time right here at the bottom of TradeStation. So this bar opened up 3 minutes ago because it opened up at, of course, 11:10. It's a 5-minute bar, so it goes from 11:10 to 11:15. So in 3 minutes, that current bar has accumulated 700 or 805 transactions. It is significantly lower than its average. Its average is about 2,671. Of course, the average is a little bit skewed because of all these very high spikes that happen not only at the beginning of the day, but also at the close of yesterday. So for a volume bar in the middle of the day to exceed the average, it's going to take some momentum because it takes into account those high spikes. Interesting way of looking at volume, of course, and you just need to be aware of what TradeStation is trying to tell you. But the fact that you can switch, you know, from the number of shares to the number of transactions, I think it's something that it's useful, and it does allow you to do some additional calculations. For example, I'm going to take this same study and do a particular calculation. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to add Spider as a second data stream. So I'm going to go to data and I'm going to add a symbol. The reason why I'm adding Spider one more time is because I want to set one of the symbols to counting shares and I want to set the other symbol to counting ticks or counting trades. So I'm just going to plot Spider one more time. So what you see at the bottom is just another stream of Spider at the same interval. This is still 5 minutes, but I'm going to go to studies, add study, and I'm going to do volume average one more time. So it adds the volume average at the bottom. Now you can decide, you know, which symbol each one of these volumes is going to be based on. Let me go ahead and check the one that I inserted at the very beginning. I'm going to double click on the histogram just to go to the customize indicator dialog. And on the general tab, you can see that it's based on study number 1, which is Spider 5 minute. The 1 is what I'm trying to look at because then I'm going to check the number of the second volume to make sure that it's on the number 2 or the second symbol. So this is on number 1. And if I double click right here on the second volume indicator and I go to the general tab, you can see, well, it's not on 1, it's set on it's set on 1. So they're both set on the first symbol. I want to make sure that it's set on number 2. So notice that I have a drop down, and the drop down just gives you access to all the symbols that are in this particular chart. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but TradeStation does allow you to add up to 50 unique symbols to each chart analysis. But this second volume that I have at the bottom, I want to base it on my second symbol, the one that I added second. I'm just going to click OK. And that's it. One thing that I'm going to do next is I'm going to set one of these symbols to give me number of shares. I'm going to do that on the top one. So I'm going to double click on the top one. And I'm going to set for volume, use trade volume. And then click OK. So now you can see that this study, or the top volume, is using shares traded. But if you look at the volume right here at the bottom, it's giving you number of trades or transactions. Now, this is possible. It's possible for me to set volume to display the 2 different types of volume because I have 2 separate symbols. That's the reason why I added an additional spider here on this chart. Now, I don't have to keep the second spider visible. You know, if I already have it up here, I don't need it again down here. So I'm going to double click on this second one. And there's a setting here on the style tab that allows me to make the price data invisible. I'm not going to make it invisible. I'm going to do something different, because if you make it invisible, yeah, you won't see it, but you still see the black box where the data or the candlestick were. So I really don't want to make it invisible. What I want to do is go here to the scaling tab. And instead of having the symbol on a subgraph, I'm going to select hidden right here, and that'll hide it from view. It'll still be in the chart, and it'll still be streaming real-time data and used in certain calculations, but it will not be visible. I'm going to click OK, and there we go. Notice how the 2 indicators remain. The one at the bottom that is based on my second symbol, still visible, and it's still giving me the right number. But now I can do additional calculations. For example, I can monitor big trades by creating an average of trades, or average trade size per bar. You know, one of these gives you, of course, a number of shares. The other one gives you a number of transactions. But if you divide the number of shares by the number of transactions, it gives you an average trade size. And a lot of times that gives you an idea of when the big players are coming into the market. Where are these big institutions or the hedge funds that are trading big money, and where are those times and where are they coming into the market? Well, let's go ahead and divide one by the other. And I can do that manually. Let me bring up my calculator. If I take, you know, the 511,000 shares traded, and I divide it by the 2,600 shares, it gives me this number, 196. What does the number represent? It means that right now, the average size is 196 shares per trade. All right. Not as big as what happened, you know, at the beginning of the day. Let's go ahead and take a look at the beginning of the day. If you wanted to take a look at a particular time of the day, on your TradeStation chart, you can click on the background and hold your mouse button. Background, hold mouse button. It'll give you this data tips window. And I can move my vertical axis right on the very first bar of the day. Now take a look at what the volume numbers are telling me. Volume, it's 1.180 million shares, 1.180. If you look at the number of transactions, we're talking about 5,400. So if we take those numbers into our calculator, now let me go ahead and erase here. So we had a 180 million shares traded. That was on the first bar of the day. That was we're not looking at the average. We're looking at the exact number. And then divided by, I think it was 54,000. I'm sorry, 5,400. It gives you a trade size of 218. I think I did that correctly, right? Believe so. But it does give you a way of, calculating the trade size that is happening on a particular security. And you can do that, of course, with the average as well. The line here, the yellow line that you see on the studies, the 510, we did it earlier. And that way, identify where those big trades are coming from. Let's go ahead. One of the studies that I provided in this custom package that I provided as a download here has that study that automatically divides one by the other. Now, make it available to everyone. You'd have to import it into your TradeStation to be able to use it. Now, one of the things that I need you to do on the zip folder, let me go ahead and make that link available to everyone one more time. And Nick, I'll take your question just one moment. But the zip folder has a few things. It has a couple of workspaces, and it also has it has the ELD that contains the indicators, and the indicators are 3, I believe. You have this one right here. Looks like the one that I'm showing you right now, which is giving you the trade size average. And the other one looks like this, which has 2 forms. It has this one on the left-hand side on charting, and then you have the same indicator on radar screen. We're going to take a look at the details and how it's calculated. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the very first workspace and some of the things that we can identify here. Nick is asking about a big block indicator, which was part of the previous version of TradeStation. I'm not sure, Nick, if doesn't ring a bell. Let me go ahead and add study. You're saying that on newer versions of TradeStation, we don't have it anymore. And it used to be called Big Block. Let me see what I have here on my TradeStation. Yes, I don't see anything that it's called Big Block. And you're sure you didn't import it from the forums or a third party? You're sure that it was part of the TradeStation platform? Because and I'm asking because a lot of times our Easy Language team, they add new indicators to the work area, but very rarely they remove anything. If they do any changes, it's just to enhance the indicator. But for the most part, we always keep the ones that already exist on TradeStation. So this is Supercharts and 2000i. So you're going back in the days. Okay, I see what's happening. Maybe yes, maybe TradeStation, this new version of TradeStation, the online version, it's we don't have that indicator anymore. But Supercharts and 2000i are older products of TradeStation that may have had, a different collection of studies. So I'm not really sure, what the big block indicator did at that time. But a lot of times what I suggest clients to do is to go to the library and post questions there. Other TradeStation users and programmers have created indicators that you can import into your TradeStation, and maybe somebody has created a version of that study that you're looking for. So this indicator that I'm supplying with this workspace, it's named @MC. So just remember that @ or the symbol @ gets sorted towards the very top. So this is @MC, and it's called average trade size right here. @MC average trade size. You do have to double click the ELD that is part of the zip folder, so make sure that you install the indicator first before you open up the workspace. In this case, what this indicator is giving you, it's not number of shares, it's not number of transactions, it's just giving you trade size. And let's take a look at that very first bar of the day. You can see on the very first bar of the day, the trade size was 521. 521 is a significant trade size for this security. I was looking at Spider, but this is Verizon, which is okay. On Verizon, we have a trade size of 521, and the price is about $44. If you do the multiplication, did I close my calculator? I sure did. So we do 521 times $44. So we're talking about every trade costing about $22,000. If you go over to Spider, you know, every study that you have in here will recalculate. Notice this big spike right here at 11:25 a.m., not even at the beginning of the day. So this is a type of study, you know, that breaks that mold of having volume in this pattern of a bull where you see, you know, higher activity at the beginning and higher activity at the very end. This is a very telling study where you see where the big players are coming in. At 11:30 or 11:25, the average trade size, well, the average trade size was 182, but on this particular bar, the trade size was 332. Pretty impressive. And we're talking about average trade size. Well, the scale here is a little bit different. Okay. That's why it looks a little bit different like that. It's just that you don't see the zeros down here, and that's why the bar here looks like it's 5 times, you know, the average, but it's not really 5 times the average. It's not even twice the average, but it's okay. But notice how the trade size here is 332. Now, 332 on this particular stock is significant because if you do the multiplication, the price of Spider is 571, and I'm going to multiply this by the trade size of 332. And it just gives you that every single trade is $189,000. That's an average trade size. Pretty impressive for that particular bar. So we know that something happened on that bar. Not everybody has, you know, $189,000 to invest in a particular on a single position. But in this particular case, we see some big players coming into the market at 11:25 a.m. and provide us with this average trade size. Okay. I see, Nick. It doesn't seem like it's a difficult. I'm just looking at the alert criteria that Nick is specifying right here in the chat. It doesn't seem like it's difficult to set up here in TradeStation for you to identify large blocks. In fact, maybe we have something similar that you could use. What I would do, it's probably take a look at this indicator called volume custom. It does allow you to customize volume in many different ways. So maybe if you send me an email, I could probably, you know, try to locate something similar for you. Okay. By the way, if anybody here has any questions about the content, you're having issues downloading the file, you lose the file, you want to get in contact with me, our email is education@tradestation.com. Okay, let me just put it right here in the chat, just in case you want to communicate with me. And the last symbol that I wanted to show you, this is a very cool one because it gives you giving you trade size. But this one over here, which is also part of this workspace, let me go ahead and make this chart bigger so you can see it. All right, so the volume indicator at the bottom looks very interesting. It has a different style. And I'll explain, you know, what you're looking at right here, but it's very colorful and very telling as well. But do you remember this when we started this session and I said, how do you compare what's happening right now with what's happening at the same time yesterday? How do you compare the exact time right now with the time yesterday? Right now it's 11:30 and we're looking at volume today, right? How does it compare to the volume yesterday? Well, this indicator creates buckets for each one of the candles that you have on the chart. So you have, you know, we know that the market opens at 9:30. So for every day, we're going to have a 9:30 bucket. The 9:30 bucket will contain trading activity for those very first 5 minutes of the day. But these buckets will accumulate the volume for those 5 minutes. And what the indicator does is that it creates an average of a look back period of buckets. It'll say, okay, for the past 10 days, which is a default look back here, for the past 10 days, take all the 9:30 a.m. buckets and average them together so that I have an average for 9:30. That is more significant because if you look at the trading activity today at 9:30 and you're able to compare the 9:30 activity with the average of the 9:30 a.m. bars, it's very telling because now you're seeing is the 9:30 volume right now higher or lower than what it was for the past 10 days. So that's a better way of looking at average because because volume is very sensitive to time. We know that there's much more trading activity at the beginning of the day, and there's much more trading activity at the end of the day. So this is a very, very clear way of comparing apples to apples because you are comparing or including that sensitivity of volume in your average. So what is the histogram right here at the bottom telling you? Well, you can see how the volume gradually goes up until the very end of the day, and then it resets all the way to the bottom and starts accumulating again. So this kind of wave that you see right there in the study just represents accumulated volume, but it says accumulated volume in an average format. And it's interesting because it'll just tell you how the volume accumulates in average, as opposed to what the volume looks like for the current trading session. And what I mean by that is the crosses that you see right on that study. So two separate things. The histogram is average accumulated volume. And the crosses, the green and the red crosses, is where the volume is today. So whenever you see those crosses higher than the wave, it's because today's volume is higher than its average. And when you see the crosses below the wave, it's because that day's volume was lower than the average. That's what this means. Of course, we see many more colors that represent other things, but that's the basic concept here. The wave is the average. The crosses is the current day's trading volume. So you do a very clear comparison of what's happening at any particular time. Let's take a look at the coloring on the histogram. Whenever you have magenta, it just means that today's volume is below average. And whenever you have cyan, it's because today's volume is higher than the average. Whenever you have yellow, yellow is kind of an alert because if it's reached a certain percentage above that average. I believe by default is 25% above the average. So if volume is 1,000, it would have to have 1,250 in order for it to be, 25% above. Does that make sense? So that's what the color of the histogram means, whether it is above, below, or exceeded a certain percentage. And the color of the crosses, it's an interesting concept because it's measuring acceleration. So it's comparing how fast the average changes from histogram to histogram or from bar to bar, and how fast the volume changes on today's trading activity. So if you have a higher percentage change or a higher change on today's activity, it'll paint the cross green. But if you have a higher change in the average, then it'll paint the cross red. So you see a swatch of red crosses right here is because the acceleration on today's volume was not as steep as it was in the average. And that is very clear because you can see how the crosses here are getting closer and closer to the histogram or the average. Whenever you have a swatch of green bars, is because the acceleration of today's volume is higher than what the average did. And you can see how the crosses are separating from that wave. Interesting indicator. There's a few things you can do here. So yes, Nick, I'm just looking at your question here. Yeah, send it there. If you have it, we can probably build it here on TradeStation. If you don't have the code, I don't think it's very complicated to provide you with something that can do that for you, okay? One thing that you have to keep in mind when you use an indicator like this, which is supplied to you in that zip folder that I provided, is that you have to customize it. So let me go ahead and show you exactly what I mean. I'm going to go here to a workspace, blank chart. All right, this is Spider on a 5-minute time frame. I'm going to go to studies, add study. The name of the study is at MC intraday volume average charting, CH. I click OK. And notice that when I add the study on my chart, it doesn't do anything. And this is what I wanted to show you, that if you add it to a chart without customizing it, you're just going to get a black box at the bottom. The reason for this is because if I squeeze the chart, I only get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 historical days plus today's trading activity. So we have, 5 complete and 1 that is still ongoing. It doesn't have quite the historical amount of data that is required for the study to give you a calculation. Do you guys remember when we said how many bars it uses by default? We said it uses 10 days of look back. And if it doesn't find the 10 days, it's just going to do this, what it's doing right now. It's just going to give you a black box and not give you any values. But as soon as I provide my chart enough historical days for the indicator to calculate, it should come up. So if I say, give me 10 days, I don't even have to go any bigger than 10 days. It only needs 10 days. So 10 days, hit enter. And you can see how the indicator starts showing here on the far right. Of course, it doesn't look as full as it would if you had more data. Of course, it needs all these days in history to calculate it. And as soon as it had enough to calculate and start plotting, it starts plotting a histogram. So don't limit yourself just to the exact amount it needs. If I do 60 days, then that's going to give me a little bit more historical data, and I see more of the indicator. You see great days such as this one. This was back in October 1st. Very volatile day for the markets. We see a big sell-off on Spider. Then we see a big rally towards the afternoon. So there was a massive amount of volume traded. You can see how today's or that day's trading volume, the acceleration was impressive compared to what the average was telling you. So those are the type of things that you would be alerted on by using an indicator like this. Okay. And another thing that I wanted to show you before I let you guys go is a radar screen. Yeah, the Eloise, yes, the session's being recorded. It'll take us, a couple days to edit the recording, upload it, have compliance review it, and then it'll be posted on the TradeStation YouTube channel. So make sure that you subscribe to our channel and turn on the alerts so that you get notified every time that we upload a video, and you'll see when the video comes up on YouTube. Okay. So going back to this indicator is also another version for radar screen, which is very useful as well. Let me go here to window and open up my radar screen. Okay. This is the NASDAQ 100, as you can see right here inside of my radar screen. Let me remove the label and the symbol itself. By the way, the workspace is already created, and you just need to make sure that you import the indicator and then add it here to radar screen. There are a couple things that I don't want to see on this indicator. For example, we can see the alerted percent is set to 125%, meaning that if the current volume exceeds the average by, or if the current volume is 125% of its average, it'll give you an alert. And this is day to average. Notice that it's set to 10. If there are columns on any study that you don't want to see, but they're part of the calculation, in this case, these are part of the calculation, but they're of the same number all the way down. So if you want to hide certain values, just right click on the column header, go to studies, click on show hide plots, and you can choose which plots to see. So if you want to remove day to average and the alerted percent, and then click OK, then you can see how it just condenses the view. You don't have these extra columns taking up space of your radar screen. Okay, so now we have an alert column. This is giving you an alert message if it exceeds your percentage, your threshold. It gives you the volume percent. So for example, for Apple, which is the symbol at the very top, you can see that there's a 0.85, meaning that today's volume is 85% of its average. That's what that entails. And it gives you the numbers here. So the average is 10.5 million. On the current bar, we have 9 million. So we're a little under the average. And that's why we have a 0.85. The acceleration is pretty much, which one is moving faster. Was the average moving faster, or was today's volume moving faster? For example, for Airbnb, we're getting an alert right now. Why? Because we are above 125. Today's volume is 129% of its average. See, we can see it right here. Today's volume is about 800,000. In average is about 620. And notice how the volume is accelerating faster for Airbnb. So you can start doing some filtering here and finding symbols that meet certain criteria. For example, I can say, give me symbols that the volume percent is greater than 1. Here we go. Now we're only looking at the symbols that are at least the same amount as the average. And you can see there's 36 symbols that match the criteria. You can see the percentage here. They're all above 1. And you can see that very clearly here and use it as a filtering mechanism. These are the stocks that right now are trading more shares than what they do in average. So very interesting way of looking at volume. So yeah, these indicators are here for you to use. If anybody has any difficulties, by the way, the colors here are exactly the same as the ones that you see in charting. So whenever you see this cyan color, it's because today's volume is higher. And that's why we don't see any magenta here, because we filtered it with any volume higher than 1 or higher than 100. But if I remove this filter, here we see the magenta. The magenta ones are the ones that are trading below the average. Let me see what inputs are here. So in the studies, you have how many days to average and the alert percentage. On the chart, I think there's an additional input on the charting one. Let me go here to window, chart analysis. On the charting indicator, if you go to inputs, you also have a mode here, background color. If you were using white, it just changes the color of the indicator so that it looks better on a white background. That's all that it does. So that's background color. If you're black, you know that it makes the colors a little bit more intense, so they're easier to see. Okay, I think that's my class. Please make sure that you apply the study to radar screen. I think it makes a lot of sense for you to see the indicator in radar screen, because it does alert you on volume that is out of the ordinary, and it may signal, some trends being developed in any particular direction. So make sure that you look at the indicator a little bit more closely. That's my class for today. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. Please check the events calendar. We always have different topics that are upcoming. All the classes are recorded, so you're always welcome to watch a recording as well. Tomorrow, we're going to do a getting started at 10 a.m. in the morning. We're going to highlight basic features of the TradeStation desktop. So if you're new to TradeStation and this presentation was a little bit difficult to follow, we have more introductory classes in the Getting Started series, which are Wednesdays at 10 a.m. It's also a great opportunity for you to ask questions about platform functionality, so make sure that you join me tomorrow. Guys, thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.